A Tribe Left in Ruins by Albert Tanjaya, Abba Rainvald, Ashen Saju, and Ben Greeley. If the so-called white people would have been more honest and would have kept their treaties, if the Native Americans had not been pushed into a corner, had they been given the proper food and nourishment that they were promised, it could have been a whole different way of life. For them, for us. When the U.S. government, who made a pact with us, would not live up to its agreement, we had to defend ourselves. We lost everything. We lost a percentage of the acreage that we were supposed to be occupying. We lost every acre. When you think of our warriors that were hung there and the sacrifice that they made for me and all my people, it makes it a little bit easier to know that they sacrificed so we can have what we have today.
August 17, 1862. 4 Dakota men murdered 5 settlers near the Acton Township of Minnesota. This event sparked a war where both sides will shed blood, especially the Dakota Indians. The United States government forced them to negotiate treaties for their land in exchange for goods and annuities, while forcing them to live on reservations and causing turmoil and violence to erupt. Their motive for killing the 5 white settlers was the lack of food, which was supposed to be supplied by the Lower Sioux Agency, and delayed payments from the United States government. In theory, the United States government turned its back on the Native Americans, disrespected their land, and violated their rights in order to fulfill the westward expansion of the United States. The name Dakota means ally. They were a peaceful tribe who would hunt and gather in the spring, cultivate crops and hunt game during the summer, and have large annual hunts in the autumn season. In the winter, the Dakota would rest and feast on the supplies saved from prior years. All of that changed when they first encountered the European settlers. The first treaty ever presented to the Dakota was Pike's Treaty on September 23, 1805.
I think, for example, the 1805 Pike Treaty, it was the treaty that gave a bit of land that eventually a military post would be built on. But I think for many Dakota people, they saw that as being positive, in fact, because they thought being a place of trade. So having something closer to home, that seemed like a benefit. I believe that they did not understand this as they would be giving up that land for forever.
The 1837 treaties allowed the U.S. government to obtain the land between the St. Croix and Mississippi rivers for new settlement in what is now part of Minnesota. The Dakota Indians received payments, provisions, and goods perpetually. However, they did not have the right to hunt or fish in those territories. The Dakota Indians finally received their annuities on October 1837. However, the provisions they received were insufficient in quantity and inferior in quality. The Treaty of Traverse des Sioux of July 23, 1851, requested that the Dakota give up ownership of modern Minnesota and a small part of South Dakota. In return, the Dakota would get $1,655 which was to be used for agriculture, schooling, medical care, and to cover the cost of Indian removal. Similarly, the Treaty of Mendota of August 5, 1851, promised the Dakota a new reservation along the Minnesota River, a promise that will never be fulfilled. The continuation of treaties offered the Dakota more goods and food. However, if they did not comply, military pressure would be used. The Dakota tribe could not do much, and so they gave up their land and moved further upward in order for the United States to expand westward without Native American interference.
And then later on, it's like, well, we've gotten their lands and resources, we've got their annuity payments. Now really we don't need them anymore, and in fact they're in the way. So the war comes at a time when the most Americans in Minnesota, who are primarily living in southern Minnesota, Dakota homelands, just really see Dakota people as an impediment to progress, kind of in the way, and it would just be better if they could leave altogether.
By the 1860s, the Dakota Indians felt that the treaties with the U.S. government were no longer upheld. They slowly starved from delayed goods, lacking the foods they were promised. They felt cheated by the Great Father, the president at the time. They relied on U.S. assistance to survive, Do you think that the Dakota was right to engage in battle with the American government?
Even Taoyate Duta's response about, this is not a wise decision. You are not going to win this war, but I'll fight and die with you. But I think for many Dakota people, and not all, they felt like if we have to stand for something. I know there's this phrase that I've often heard said, I'd rather die on my feet. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees.
The following day, Dakota warriors attacked the Lower Sioux Agency, killing traders and various government employees. The Dakota continued their rampage, attacking settlements along the Minnesota River Valley. Alarmed by the increasing violent activity in the west, a U.S. Army echelon was sent from a nearby fort to cease fighting. However, they were ambushed by the warriors. The next day, August 20th, the warriors assaulted Fort Wrigley. 2 days later, they did it again, sieging the fort until Union reinforcements arrived to relieve the fort. The next day, the Dakota returned to attack New Ulm a second time and to engulf the settlement in fire. 32 townspeople died, and more than 60 people were wounded. This battle marked the first true victory for the Dakota warriors. They continued their attacks for 4 months, while knowing that they were against a powerful foe. On November 7, 1862, Alexander Ramsey, governor of Minnesota, declared that the Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of the state. A group of close to 1,600 Dakota, consisting of old men, women, and children, marched to Fort Snelling and later kept in internment camps south of the fort. 303 Dakota men are tried on December 26 for rape and various other crimes to civilians. Missionary Henry Whipple urged President Lincoln to take action. Under Lincoln, 265 of these men are sentenced to prison. The remaining 38 are hanged, becoming the largest mass execution in the history of the United States. The Dakota at Fort Snelling were sent to various reservations in the spring of 1863. On July 3, 1863, Taoyate Duta, or Little Crow, who previously fled to Canada, was shot and killed. Money was offered to anyone who got the scalp of a Dakota Indian. Later, other Dakota leaders were captured. Sakpe and Medicine Bottle were drugged and taken to Fort Snelling, where they were tried for their war crimes. They were hung on November 11, 1865. After the recent conflicts, the Dakota tribe was left in ruins. In the years of 1866 to 1887, the United States Indian offices helped them rebuild their scattered tribe and gave them new reservation spots to live on. The Dawes Act of 1887 allowed each American Indian household to receive 160 acres of land. Eventually, the Indian-held lands are further reduced by 2/3. Finally, Congress passes the Indian Recognition Act of 1934, which gave all Indians the right of tribal sovereignty. Today, the Dakota people have joined with other Indian tribes to form the Upper and Lower Sioux communities in the state of Minnesota. The Dakota communities today commemorate the 38 men that were hanged, and hosting a commemorative march to Fort Snelling to remember the Dakota War. Their goals today are to preserve the Dakota traditions, educate their young about their past, and to continue to rebuild their community.
Mitakuyapi, ampetu kinde wa tachante wa shena pechu zambie. Ye kiapi mi de mieye wa shichu ia Darlene St. Clair makiapie. Tamakota chashaipi himataha wana chekpa untue edwati. Iche wichasha wamspe wichakia himacha. St. Claude Womspe Wakantria and Chtawani. So I said, my relatives, today I greet you with a good heart and a handshake. I am Ie Kiapiwi. I said my Washichu name is Darlene St. Clair. I said I'm Dakota. I'm from a place called Chanshaiapi, which means they paint the trees red, which is now known as the Lower Sioux Reservation in southwestern Minnesota. And but now I live in the Twin Cities. I teach American Indian Studies. That's what I said.